Harav YCD, welcome back. The share should be Zechus for Kol Haloshon, with all the tzaros that they find themselves in Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. We are learning Masechet Orlah. We are nearly up to the month of Elul, and Masechet Orlah, we're going to talk about the forbidden fruit within the first 3 years of its growth. Okay, we're going to talk about whether it applies in Eretz Yisrael or Chutz La'aretz, and how we work out the calculations of the year, what's called a tree, where there are exemptions of Orlah, what's the din nowadays, how you nullify Orlah, right, burning of Orlah. We'll talk about all that. So let's start Perek Rishon Halacha Aleph. So we have the question whether the Issa of Orlah is on a tree that was planted not for the sake of its fruit, but it was planted for other purposes. So Anater Lisyag, so you plant wood, a fruit tree, but really for the wood to make a fence for your field, or to use the wood in building construction, but not for eating the fruit. Part of an Orlah you are exempt from Orlah, so all the fruit that grows on it is permitted to be eaten. Rabbi Yossi said not only a tree that's there for the fence is exempt, but even he said, look, hapinimi, the inner side of the tree will be lemachol for food, v'hachitzon, and the outer side lisyag will be for a fence. Then hapinimi chayv, the inner side is chayv for Orlah, but hachitzon patur, and the outer side, which is for a fence, is exempt. Now, although one part of the tree is for fruit, and nevertheless the fruit that grows on the side for the fence is patur from Orlah. Okay, and the telis yagol okara is patur. We said if you plant a tree for the sake of the wood, you are exempt from Orlah. Ksiv, it says unta'atem, and you shall plant kol eitz machal, all trees of food. The words eitz machal, we learn eshuhu lemachal only if providing the tree was planted for the sake of the food. Chayav, then you are liable. But lisyag or l'kares, if it was there for a fence or for beams, whatever, or eitzim, for other firewood, patur, you are exempt. Me'ata, now if the source is from the word eitz machal, maybe it's only trees which are not fruit trees. Maybe a fruit tree where the fruit is fitting to be eaten. Maybe even though your intention was for a fence, maybe you'll still be liable. That's why the Apostle says eitz machal is lashon here. We're excluding any tree which is not for food, even if there is fruit there which is edible. Right? If you're just excluding barren trees, we should have said eitz pri or something like that. We wouldn't have to stress that the tree is machal. Rabbi Yossi says, Yilmad Dava Mitchila. So we can learn from the beginning of the pasuk in that parsha there. It says, Shalosh shanim yalachem arelim, 3 years you shall have this fruit that you can't eat. Lo yachel, that's the normal case fruit trees. The first 3 years of fruit you can't eat. We know we're talking about fruit trees here. The pasuk is forbidding the eating of fruit. So Matam 11, why does it say untatam you shall plant kol eitz machal, any fruit trees? It must be teaching me something else. Eshuhu lemachal chayav, when it's there to be eaten, then you're liable for Orlah. Lisyag, if it's for a fence, or the kores or for beams of eitzim and firewood, patur, you are exempt from Orlah, even though it is bearing fruit. Yeah, so far so good. Rabbi Yoina, lama dava misofa. He says we can learn it from the pasuk at the end of the matter, the end of the parsha. It says Vashana Chamishis, and in the 5th year, remember in the 4th year you have to take it to Yerushalmi, right? In the 5th year, it's for you. So you can eat the fruit. We know we're talking about a fruit tree here. The pasuk is talking about eating the fruit. Why does it tell me on tatem kol eitz machal you will plant all the food of the tree? It's telling me something else. Eshu lemachal chayav. When it's planted for the sake of eating, then it's chayav Orlah. Shelisyag or l'kares eitzim. When it's, however, for a fence or for beams or firewood, patur, you are patur from Orlah. Okay. Now our Mishnah seems to tell us that if it's planted for firewood or fence, it's patur from Orlah. And we're going to bring a differing opinion who limits the exemption to various cases. He said, when do we say these words? If it's planted not for food as patur, you plant it for a fence or beams, something which is fit for purpose is like branches where the branches are condensed close together, or wood which is like a very big stump, right, where you can make nice beams out of it. Yeah, it's going to be fitting for purpose. Or firewood which burns well. But according to this opinion, nata, if you plant it for a fence, something not fitting for them, you did a vine. A vine doesn't have a very wide stump, right? So it's very difficult to use for beams for construction. Chayav, he says, then you would be chayav arla. This is Rav Shimon Gamliel's opinion. Now, some Rav Shimon Gamliel, it makes sense what Rav Shimon Gamliel says. If it's not fitting for a fence, how can your intention help to exempt it from arla? Ma tamud rabbanan. Why do the Chachamim differ? Why do they say the exemption is there even if it's not fitting for it? So why do they argue? It makes very good sense what he says. Rav Zira says, when the Chachamim said that if it's planted for a fence is potel, that's only b'meshana seder netiyasam. So it's only that you're changing it from the normal way of growth. You've changed it from the normal way of planting. Right? For example, le'etzim, let's say you want firewood, it's talking about the safe. You put the wood very close together, you plant it very close, and not like the normal case of planting trees for their fruit, where you'll leave a certain gap so that the tree will grow properly. And lekairos, you're using it for the beams, it's talking about where your intention, you see from his actions, b'meshaper, you are sort of cutting the branches to thicken the stump. It should be fitting for building. So you're growing it in a way enabling it to be used for building construction. Lisiag, when you have your fence, Makom hasiag mochiach alav, the area of where you've planted it gives evidence that was your intention. You're planting it at the edge of the field, right? And not like people who plant fruit trees, you do it in the field. So since we're talking about cases where you see from the way it's been grown that this is planted for another purpose and not for eating the fruit, that's why the Chachamim said that even if it's not fit for that purpose, you're still exempt from Orlah. You understand? It's because there is another reason you can see from the way it's been planted that it is there for that purpose. Now the Gemara brings the Tana who holds the patur of a tree planted for a fence is not said with all trees. Tani v'shem Rameh, we learned in the name Rameh, Kol Haloshon is ba'in lemachshavas patur. All trees can have the opportunity for the owner to cause upon them, yes, an exemption from Orlah. Let's say you plant it for a fence, whatever it is. But he says, except for the olive tree and the fig tree. Now the fruit is so important, so significant. Even if it's your intention not for the purpose of the food, you are batel, your thoughts are nullified. And the din Orlah has not gone away because these fruit are just too important for you to nullify and say, oh, this is offense. You can't do that with an olive tree. Now, Rameh in a brisa is Kedateg. So we quoted Rameh, and it's like his view elsewhere. The Amar Rameh says in Kelayim, now this is about trees that you've put a vine on them. All the trees are considered like barren trees that you put a vine there, nullify their bottle to the vine. Except for the olive tree and the fig tree where you put a vine on it, because their importance, they're not bottle to the vine. Right, this fits in like the view of Rameh Brisa, that the olive tree and the fig, even when you plant it not for food, I'm afraid you do not remove that food label because of their importance. Okay, now we bring another Tana who's more machmir than Rameh. Tani b'shem Rav Shimon, we got a view in the name of Rav Shimon. Ein lecha ba lemachshavas ptur. You're not going to find a tree that can reach the possibility of getting the exemption in Orlah, except these three. These three can get an exemption in Orlah. Only these three. Rimin, v'shikmin, utzlaf. Rimin are your jujubes. They always translate them at. Shikmim. Sycamores. Utzlaf and your capers. Now these are not our sycamores. Our sycamores don't really have fruit, right? They're one type of sycamore. Is it I think so. We have one type of sycamore that obviously has some sort of fruit. And uslaf and capers, where the fruit is not significant for food, and therefore the owner's intention helps, that we say this is wood, this is beams, we remove that label of being a fruit tree. But other fruits, even if you're going to say they're not for eating, they are considered eating. And the din Orlah has not gone away. So this is the most serious of all the opinions. Rav Shimon says only these three remove their Orlah status. Okay. Now we've learned that the fruit of a tree that's planted for a fence or for wood has not got a din Orlah. Now what about this fruit as far as Maaser is concerned? Do you have to take Maaser on these fruits before you eat it? Well, since the owner is not interested to use them, it's Hefker, and therefore it's exempt from Maaser. And even you're going to tell me that since the fruit's not there for eating, it's not considered food, and maybe we shouldn't obligate the Maasris. So maybe that's what we should say. It's not for eating. Maybe there's no Maaser obligation. Tiplukta is an argument. Rabbi Baba Mama and Rabbi Hilla. The Itpalgun, we have an argument. Hameshame Peraisav. One's guarding his fruit to use it, le'etzim, to use it for firewood. Rabbi Baba Mamalama, he said, look, if you're taking the fruit to eating, chayav, then you have to take Maaser. Rabbi Hilla B'Shem Rabbi Yossi Amma, he says, Pato, he says, no, you don't have to take Maaser on it. Now, what's the source for the view of Rabbi Baba Mamal? So he was the one who said, if you take fruit for eating, you're chayav. Rabbi Baba Mamalama, he says, chayav, you have to take Maaser on this fruit which you're taking for eating. Min Hadar, from the following drasha, the Torah says, the Levi comes to take his Maaser, he does not have a share in the land with you. It's what you have and he hasn't got, you have to give him Maaser on that. Yasa Hefka, as opposed to ownerless stuff, Hefka stuff, is exempt from Maaser because you have an equal right to what he has. Yad Chava Yad Shavin Bay. Who leket, and the same thing applies to the gleanings, leket, he shekha, the forgotten stuff, he peah, and the corn in the field, he hefka, and the same thing with fruit of hefka. So they are all exempt from Maaser for this reason, because everyone has an equal share in it, everyone has an equal right in it. So we learn from here that the Torah of hefka is because the Levi can take it. And in our case, the owner, if you're guarding the wood, and you don't allow other people to come in, although your intention is for firewood, but if you don't allow other people to come in, then you're not going to get that exemption. And the Gemara brings a source for the view of Rav Hilla. Right? Rav Hilla, he was the one who said you're potter, you don't have to take Maaser. Rav Hilla of Rabbi Yossi Amma, he said if you're guarding the fruit to use it for wood, for firewood, potter, you don't have to take Maaser. He learns it min Hadar from this Mishnah. Kuzba is your what? Coriander? Shazara lezera, yeah. If you sow it for seeds, not for the actual fruit, but for the seeds, yauka potter, the vegetable is potter from Maasris. So the fruit where you had no intention to eat it, you're potter from Maasris, even though it's fitting for eating. Okay? It's called gad, kuzba. It's ground and used as a spice. In the early stage of its development, the vegetable is fitting for eating, and sometimes is used for eating. When it grows a bit more and you have these seeds, then the vegetable gets hard, and then it's not fitting for eating. Right? So if you're sowing it for the sake of the seeds, then the vegetable which will get hard is potter from Maasris, even if you gathered it when it was still fitting to eat. So from here we see that fruit that's not fitting for eating, was not set aside for eating, is not considered an eichel as far as Maasris obligations. Okay. Shanya hi kuzba. He says kuzba is different. Because even though even though the vegetable is not chai Maasris, but there's another way, there's another situation. Yesh lo goren acheres. There is another chance to take Maaser on it, which is with the seeds. They will be chai Maasris. The vegetable won't be, but the seeds will be. In our case, the fruit which is there for fuel, for wood, for fire, for the fire, if we're going to exempt that from Maasris, we've removed the whole Maaser obligation from this tree altogether. Now the one brings another ride to the proof of Rav Hilla, to the view of Rav Hilla. Where's the price that tells me that if it's fitting for eating, even though you're not going to eat it, it's possible for Maasris, even if there's no other way for it to be chai Maasris? He says it's the following brisa. Hamakayim, if you keep melea, like a whole bed of shalkruv lezera, your sort of cabbages, whatever it is, lezera, for seed, but not for eating. You have no intention to eat the vegetable. You're going to wait till the vegetable goes hard. You're going to have the seeds. You're going to sow the seeds. Yeah? But la datoi, then your view is not accepted. Basically, since it's not the way to do it, no one has a whole aruga, a whole bed, a flower bed, as it were, for seeds. So it's considered food. It's chai b'maisrus. But if you just do kalachin, maybe the tops of it, yechidin, a few individual stalks for the sake of the seed, lo bat la datoi, then your view is not nullified, because people will set aside a few stalks for seed to grow, the new crop. So those stalks are not considered eichel, they are potter from maisrus. But Rav Yonah said, "V'hu, this distinction is said only in a case shalikate yerek, where you gathered the cabbage when it was the state of vegetables, when it's soft and fitting to eat. Avlim loilikate yerek, if you didn't gather the vegetables soft, but you waited till it got hard, then even in the case you set aside a whole aruga for seed, you're potter for maisrus, because." Are we going to say eitzim chayavim b'maisrus? There should be a meiser obligation on wood. If this vegetable is hard, rock hard, how can you take maisrus on it? When it's hard, it's like wood. You can't eat it. Definitely potter for maisrus. It must be the brisa which is talking about a case where the aruga, the guy decided, he changed his mind to gather the crop. It must be still fitting to eat. It's still soft. In this situation, the brisa says, if from the beginning the whole thing is for zera, but la data, then your view is cancelled, because when you go and gather it for eating, while it's still a vegetable, there is a meiser obligation. So we see with kruv, there's no part which is chayv meiser, it's only the vegetable. The zera, the seed, is not eaten at all. Nevertheless, the brisa says that if you left aside a few stalks for seed, they are potter from meiser. So you see that something which is not set aside for eating is potter from meiser, even when the chiyuv meiser's obligation will disappear altogether. So the same thing here, you're guarding your fruit for firewood, whatever it is, there is a reason to exempt them from maser. Now the Gemara brings another doubt about fruit of a fruit tree which was used and planted for a fence or for firewood. Now are we going to say, since the owner doesn't want to eat the fruits, anyone can take it? Now, even if you're going to tell me it's treated as wood, you can't just go and steal wood. So what's the question then? Like, what's this? What, a cherry tree of some kind? Where the wood is there for fuel, lies behind mamash. There's no purpose, there's no significant purpose. They're not fitting this sort of wood fitting for a fence or anything. In this situation, it could be the owner doesn't care about his fruit and other people will be able to take it. So it's a very good question. We have no answer. If everyone can take these cherries, whatever it is, they're part of a maser because of hefka. So if it's hefka, then so what's that machlokes about chiyuv maser? Maybe the whole machlokes is about other vegetable, other fruit, but not this. Some say even if you don't care about it, you still can't take it. But if they said clearly they don't care, they did an action to show they don't care. Maybe. How can you take it? If the owners didn't do any action, that they don't care, how can you take it? Some say they're not there for eating, and they're not really fitting for anything else. They're like the waste, which is becoming hefka of its own accord, even without an action. All right, let's carry on. Now, trees where the fruit is bad quality and not fitting to be eaten, but the owners planted it for eating. Is that eitz machal? Is that Harav Orlah or not? Rimin, the jubes, shenate l'shem, which were planted for the sake of eating the fruit, which are and rimin and hadas, shenate l'shem b'nois hadas. Again, it's planted for the sake of eating the fruit. Istinetani, some say chayv Orlah, Istinetani, and some say that it's potter from Orlah. Some say it's chayv, some say it's potter. Okay. This is here. In the branches of the hadas, you'll get types of berries. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When Sukkah talks about it, and then they start becoming fitting to eat when they turn black. Okay. Rav Chisda. So on the one hand, we've said some say chayv, that you are chayv Orlah, and some say you're potter. There's no problem here. The one who says this fruit is chayav olah is makom sharayv meshamrin. Most people guard these fruit for eating. They're considered eitz machal. Mandama pator, one says they've got no din olah, makom she'ein harav meshamrin. Most people don't guard them for eating. They're not considered eitz machal, right? Even if the owner themselves planted it with that intention for eating, but he's batal data, his mind is cancelled compared to everyone else. Now, Rav Chisda explained the first brayso, the case where most people guard it. So he says, Rav Yossi boy, if most people guard these fruit for eating, lama le, why do you tell me that chishev, that the owner thought about it for eating when he planted it? Afilu lo chishev, even he had no intention to eat it, they should be chayav olah, because the minig in the place is to eat this fruit. What does it matter what he does and what thought he does? Because kachon oimrim, are we going to say zayis ta'ena? You're going to tell me olives and figs? You're not chayav olah ad sheyachshav alein. You have to think about eating them. Surely they're there to be eaten, right? Most people will eat them, right? Don't tell me you need a special intention for it, right? They're there for eating. So the same thing here. If most people are guarding these jujubes and b'nai hadas for eating, then they should be chayav olah, even if you didn't plant it with that intention that you were going to eat it. Ella, so he says no. Half the people guard it. And half people don't guard it for eating. So you understand, talking about they're there for eating, but half the people don't guard it for eating. So you shouldn't be chayav olah unless you clearly have the intention to eat it. Rav Masi said it could be. The first price is talking about a place where most people guard it for eating. And the way Rav Chisda said, now you ask me if that's the case, why is it talking about a case where the owner had intention to eat it? It could be, the reason is, Minda Bas Rasa, from the second brayso, which is talking about a place, Makom She'ein Rav Meshamrin, where most people don't guard these things for eating. So therefore we should stress that this fruit is there for eating, to tell me that Afilu Chishev, even if you had the intention to eat it, you're still potter from Orlah, because the minig in this place is people don't guard it. You follow? And since the brayso says talking about a case where the fruits were there for eating, the first brayso also mentioned this. So what he's answering is, the chiddush is in the place where most people don't guard it, yeah? So there's a need to stress that these fruits are for eating, but most people don't guard it. And even though you wanted to eat it, you are still potter from Orlah, because most people don't guard it. Okay, the brayso had to talk about that case. Look, clearly you intended, you wanted to eat this fruit, and it's still potter from Orlah. Rabbi Yochanan, Gefen she'alas, a vine that grew of its own accord, let's say from a seed that the wind took it somewhere, but Makom Choshin in a forest, B'tura min Orlah, is exempt from Orlah, because no one's going to cut out grapes for eating. It's not considered eitz machal, it's potter from Orlah. Rabbi Yosef says not only where it went of its own accord, I feel a nita, someone planted it in the forest, it's potter from Orlah, because no one's going to start bothering to harvest it, okay? Therefore it's not considered eitz machal. B'hataninan, we've learnt in the following Mishnah, ha'ayla ma'elav, a tree that grows of its own accord, chayav Orlah, is chayav in Orlah. Now, talking about a tree that grew, let's say, where people grow them, in a forest or other places, and yet the Mishnah obligates in Orlah. So what answers Taman, in that Mishnah, talking about Shanatan, you planted b'makom yishuv, you planted the tree in a residential area. But here, Shanata, you planted it, we grew up its own accord, b'makom chajin, in a forest. And therefore, it's potter from Orlah. Rav Elazar says, that which you'll tell me, if it grows in the forest, it's potter from Orlah, that's for she'ena isa k'dei tefilasa. The fruit are not worth the while of the expense of actually gathering the fruit. The amount you'll get by gathering them is not going to be worth the bother of doing the effort to get them. In this situation, the fruit is not really going to be eaten, the Isa Orlah is not chal. If you produced enough for all the worth of the work, and it's worthwhile, then chayaves, it should be obligated in Orlah, because you'll probably bring the fruit to the residential area. Okay? Rav Huna asked, Esrog, Shenatan a mitzvah. You planted a tree to grow esrogim for sukkahs. Ma'aseh chai ba'olah, you chai b'nolah. Chazar of Huna, I answered this question. Ama esrog shenatan mitzvah chai ba'olah. He says, yes, you are chai b'nolah if you planted for sukkahs. And although there is an Issa Orlah, you can still fulfill your mitzvah of esrog with it. Although elsewhere we've learned in Sukkah that it's possible a mitzvah. Anyway, but like Eitaninon, have we not learned in a Brisa, and it says with the full minimum on Sukkah, so Lakachtem Lachem, you will take for yourself on the first day, Priyetz Hada, and we learn the full minimum has to be yours, and not from a mitzvah like an esrog that was acquired with money that you were redeemed Maaseh Sheni with. So the same situation, we should dash in the word Lachem, with Orlah, 3 years is Areilem Yolachem, and we should exclude from Issa Orlah a tree which was planted for a mitzvah. So there's a reason we should exempt an esrog from Orlah. The one says, no, there's a difference. Taman, with the full minim, ulakachtem lachem, we learn the word lachem, so you'll take for yourself. It means bedamim, with money. And what we mean is, la min mitzvah, you shouldn't take money that was used for a mitzvah, whatever it is. But here, as far as Orlah, there's no meaning in the pasuk to exclude a tree that was planted, for mitzvah for dinner Orlah. Kamada tema gabe shofar. It means just like we say with shofar, where it says Yom Torah Yalachem, right? It will be a day of blowing for you, and then we explain it means mikal makom. Basically, you can use a shofar, whatever it is. We don't say lachem is excluding. It's got to be yours. We don't dash on that. But so here as well, Shalosh shanim Yalachem arelim lo yachel. 3 years it will be for you arelim lo yachel. You can't eat it. Mikal makom. Basically, Issa Orlah is chal on all fruit. There's no exemption here. There's only fruit which is lachem. No, it doesn't matter. It applies to all fruit. Okay. Some say the word lachem is telling me the chal wherever there is. All right. Ma beinai. What is the difference between one who plants esrogim for a mitzvah where we say yachai ba'olah le'meshame peroisav le'etim, guarding your fruits for fuel? That there you're potter from Orlah, as we've said. Taman, when you're guarding for fuel, kashem shul roitza b'peria, you want the fruit for the sake of the fire. Kacha roitza b'eitza, you also want the wood for the same purpose, but you want the wood more. So therefore, the fruit has no significance in its own right as fruit. It's secondary to the wood. But as far as planting a esrog tree for the esrogim for mitzvah, you want the fruit. So you don't want the wood. So the fruit is not secondary to the wood. But it's got importance in its own right, and therefore it's like eitz machal and it's chayv orlah. And furthermore, you have to say that esrogim planted for a mitzvah, they have importance in their own right. Min hadaf, from the following. So Rav Chanina said, this is, you'll take for yourself puri eitz hada, right? If you're going to tell me that the esrog that grows on the tree planted for a mitzvah is only eitzah, it's like part of the wood, it's not considered a fruit, then you can't fulfill your duty with it on sukkahs. You're going to tell me it's part of the wood. If it's part of the wood, then how can I fulfill my mitzvah with it? You have to say that the esrog planted for a mitzvah is considered a fruit, and therefore it's got a din orlah. Ma'adamile. What other situation would be the same as Rav Chuna's question? Another example of a tree planted for a mitzvah, where we can learn from Rav Chuna's din, Yachai Orlah, would be Zayis Shenatei Lahalik by the Chanukah. You have an olive tree planted to use for the fuel on Chanukah. So here the tree will be Chayv Orlah, even though you planted it for the sake of mitzvah, just like the esrog where he said is Chayv Orlah. This mitzvah of taking the esrog and sukkahs, Tvar Torah. That's from the Torah, whereas it was lighting Chanukah, and that's only rabbinical. And you're saying we should compare the cases, that the Zayis, the olive tree is Chayv Orlah, right? One thing's clear, he says planting for the sake of Ner Chanukah is only with Rabbanan, but that can't exempt you from your Orlah obligation. Why should that exempt you? It's one thing, the other, the esrog maybe, but olive, why should a rabbinical mitzvah exempt your Orlah obligation? So, what would be a comparable case? you have an olive tree planted to light the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, and that's biblical. Zed v'Torah, Zed v'Torah, both mitzvahs from the Torah, taking Esrog on Sukkot, and the mitzvah of lighting the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash. Therefore, you might have thought that the tree planted for the sake of one of these two mitzvahs is part of from Orlah. You might have thought so. But Rav Huna's din tells us that's not the case, that the Issa Orlah is chal in both situations. Okay? All right. Rav Yossi said, even you're going to tell me that he said you plant for a fence, and you have two intentions. Let's say part of it is for food and part for the fence. So then the inner part is for the food is chayav orlah, and the outer part for the fence is potter. Okay. Now, I'm talking about a case where, let's say the branches were between the sides of the tree. So you got branches on the inner side of the tree for one purpose, and branches on the outer side for another purpose. What about if the branches were divided in height of the tree? So the branches at the top side are for one purpose, and the branches at the bottom are for another purpose. So Rav Shimon ben Yaakov, Ba'akum Rabbi Yochanan, he said one thing's clear: Nata, if you planted the tree with the intention of Salatachta and Nisyag, the fruit at the bottom you want a fence, and Elia at the top lemachal, then that should be for food. Then the fruit at the bottom for a fence, potter from Orlah. But what about if you planted it where Salatachta and lemachal, if the fruit is at the bottom, but Elia Nisyag and the top bit for a fence? What's the din? Right? You want the bottom bit for fruit and the top bit for a fence. So what's the din? Are you going to tell me the top bit is potter from Orlah? Or do we say no? The top bit can't stand in its own right. It's relying on the bottom bit, which is made for food. Maybe we're going to say, therefore, the top bit should also be secondary to the bottom bit, and it should be chayav orlah. Amala, he said, I don't know the same case, the same din applies. He said the tachton is the same din is the bottom part for a fence and the top part for food. He said or if the top part is for a fence, the tachton and the bottom part is for food. In both situations, the side which is for food is chayav orlah, the side which is for a fence is potter from Orlah. How do you know where the bottom part finishes and the top part starts? Maybe it's a Myra. You bring a twig from a side and you sort of make a sign round the edge between the two sides through this twig, and he said, until now, this is my fence, and from there onwards is for food. He says, I understand where your intention is the bottom part is for a fence, but the top part's for food, or then I understand there's no Issa Orlah in the bottom part. But in a case where the bottom part is food, but the top part is a fence, then I don't understand. The top part, the fruit is getting nourishment through the bottom part, which is chayav orlah. And you're saying the fruit at the top is potter from Orlah, is getting all its nourishment from the bottom bit. So the Gemara says the question of Rav Zira is based on his view elsewhere. Rav Zira according to his view elsewhere, you have an onion of klai kerem, forbidden mixtures, sha'akra, you took it out of the vineyard, which is you planted it elsewhere, and it carried on growing. Avila Mosif Kama, it grew a lot more from what it was before, also it's forbidden. She'en gedulei issa, those growths which grow from the onion, which is forbidden, marlin azisa, they don't nullify the issa that was there to start with. The growths are growing from issa, and therefore they are forbidden as well. And based on this, Rav Zira asked this question, in our case, even the fruits at the top get nourishment from the bottom, they themselves should also be forbidden, like Gidulei Issa. Now, Nata L'Siag, if you planted for a fence and then you changed your mind, and then you were thinking about food, then you can create a Chayav Orlah through your later thought. You've changed your mind now. Now you're going to use it for food. Whereas the machal, if your intention originally was for food and then then you think about a fence, like you do not have the ability to exempt the tree from Orlah. So first you're thinking food, and then you are thinking fence, then you cannot exempt the Orlah situation. Nata, if you planted it for a fence, and Shana Rishona, listen, the whole first year you're thinking fence. Mekava Elach, and after the first year's gone by, chisha lamachal, you think food. The kimen shechisha lamachal is chiyuv. Now that you've got an obligation of chiyuv, now you're thinking about chiyuv, chayav. It is chayav orlah. So basically, the first year was fence, and after that you're thinking food. So you have machshava food, chayav. Ba'ataninan, we learned in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi Omer, afilu amar panimi. Now you want the inner side of the tree lemachal for food. Chisan is young, and the outside to be a fence. Panimi chayav. The inner side is chayav orlah. Chisan patur. The outer one is patur. Now we should say the same thing. With a tree which is 1 year fence, and then you decide on food. We should say the bit of the tree that grew after you changed your mind should be chayav orlah, right? We should say the second year's growth should be chayav, because first year you're thinking of something else. The bit of the tree which grew in the first year for a fence, that fruit should be patur from orlah forever. So the Gemara answers Tamam, in the case Rabbi Yossi discussing, the tree that on that side, lemachal, you want it to be food. He was talking about one part of the tree is for this, one part of the tree is for that. Then lemachal la'olam, you want that for food forever. And lesiag, the part you want for the fence, lesiag la'olam, is for a fence forever. And you didn't really have machshavas chiyuv on the side of the fence. Basically, there were two sides of the fence, right? There was the fence side and there was the food side. And your food side, you want it to be only food forever. And your fence side, you want it to be fence forever. But Amhacha, here on the same thing, you change your mind. But Amhacha, when you decide to make it food, all the tree should now be food. So even that part which grew until now as exemption, because until now your intention was fence, nevertheless, by machshavas chiyuv, you brought in an obligation thought, therefore you should be chayav in orlah. Okay? Natai, I don't know if there's anywhere. A few more lines. Natai shalosh shanim lisiag, if you planted it for a fence, and the first 3 years it was a fence. And after that, you're thinking about food. But Hosif, and the fruit grew a bit more in the 4th year. Tesafto mahu, what's the dinner tesefes? Is it asam shum orlah or not? Rav Yirmiyah Amar, Rabbi said, tesefes, that extra growth, chayav, is chayav orlah. Rabbi Amar, he said, tesefes, potter. No, the extra growth is potter from orlah. Our Rabbi Yossi said, Hadad Rabbi Yirmiyah mischamia kasha. He says, the view of Rabbi Yirmiyah seems a bit difficult. When it was blossoming, this fruit, it was for a fence, not for food. We should exempt it. Veles he ela nicha. The truth is, we understand his view. Kahadad that we've learned, sadeh shehvia shlish. If you have a field of produce which grew a third, lifnei guy, in the possession of a guy, and then a Jew went and bought it, and then the produce ripens, then Rabbi Akiva said, not just the main produce, the extra that grew after the Jew acquired it, is also part of a maestros. The Chachamim say chayav. The extra is chayav maestros. We can say the same thing here according to the Chachamim, that it could be the ikra, the main part of the fruit, which blossomed at the time when it was there as a fence, patur. That's patur from orlah. But tesaftai, but the extra that grew after the owner changed his mind, chayav will be liable to orlah, because by then the fruit is considered eitz machal. Okay? To be continued, Rabbi Isai.